Good evening, everyone, and welcome to Three Wide. I'm Rick. I'm joined tonight by Anthony and Peter. Peter's looking, well, a little bit stiffer tonight than he did last week, but nevertheless, he's with us. Welcome to the show. We're here to talk NASCAR as we are each and every week, sometimes multiple times a week, depending on the topics that we have to address. And we have got a great show for you tonight. We hope you're going to enjoy it. We're going to talk about three main topics on the agenda this evening. We're going to talk about the results at Kansas. Hopefully, everybody had a chance to watch that race on Saturday night. We hope all the moms out there had a great Mother's Day yesterday. I know the ladies of the house here certainly did. I know the ladies in your house, Anthony, have a very blessed one this year. And Peter, I know that you folks had a great Mother's Day in your household as well. The second topic we're going to talk about tonight is the continued resurgence of Hendrick Motorsports, and in particular, Chevrolet. Boy, did they put on a show on Saturday night for all of us. And, there's big smiles all across this broadcast. And I know our friends at Chase Elliott Nation, while the results weren't exactly what we had hoped for, certainly the overall performance by the Chevrolet drivers and by Hendrick Motorsports was really something to behold on Saturday night. The last topic we're going to talk about is one, and normally we have a lot of fun with NASCAR, kind of talking about the sport we all love. The last topic we're going to talk about is actually a rather serious one, and one that we want to address it because it's something that we don't see all that often in our sport, and that was the revelation last week by Bubba Wallace. He is battling some issues, personal issues, and we want to address some of those issues. Talk about Bubba. He's a great young talent, and talk a little bit about some of the equipment issues that he's had at RPM, and just kind of an overall discussion of where they stand. So we've got a great show tonight. We hope everybody enjoys. Hopefully you're nice and warm and dry where you are. I know here in southern New England it's pouring yet again, but hopefully we can get on to some better weather. Of course, the weather Saturday night at Kansas, while it was beautiful weather, it looked like it was certainly cool at the track, and it provided us with some great racing. So let's recap Kansas, and Anthony, why don't you get us started in the discussion? How did we like the racing Saturday night at Kansas Motor Speedway?
From a pure racing perspective, I think other than Talladega, other than Martinsville, I think this was the best race to show off the package that they've brought to the table this year. But I think it's because of what Kansas brings to the table. I think Kansas fit the package. We saw racing and passing all throughout the field. We saw battles for the lead, unlike any that we've seen in quite a few years in terms of how long they lasted. When they occurred, there was really not many lulls in this race at all. The competition caution that was going to be flown at lap 30 really brought a big fire to the beginning of that race. Drivers knew that they could get all they wanted out of those tires for 30 laps, and we saw them get every little bit out of it. There weren't a lot of issues as far as tires or as far as cautions, except for a few towards the end of the race. But the racing that took place, to me, was some of the greatest in recent memory. People give the package, and this is something that the drivers have said. The one big flaw that people say with the package is that this is a package where you can't get in the wake of a driver. You can't follow a driver into a turn. But I'm starting to feel that you don't need that kind of a package to have good racing. This is one of those packages where if you can get a clean line and get a run on a guy and complete that, or go side by side out of the turn, it's going to produce some really good racing. I was pleased with the race overall. No matter who, to me, this was a race that no matter who would have won the race eventually, it would have been checked off the list as an exciting, good race that was a good example of the new package.
It's almost a shame. Before we go over to Peter for his thoughts, it's almost a shame that we have to go racing at the All-Star race this week because it was such a great regular season race. I almost kind of wish we were headed to a track for some more action on a good, even as a mile and a halfer. You know how I feel about those. I thought the racing was spectacular.
Yeah, it's got me really looking forward to Chicagoland.
It does. Peter, your thoughts on the race at Kansas Saturday night?
Well, I think you said it best. It was exciting. Definitely kind of piqued my interest. And what a way. Wow. What a way to lead into All-Star Week. I'm just excited. I mean, I thought it was really cool. Just kind of getting to what Anthony said before, I think Kansas really was the best track to showcase this package, to see what NASCAR was really trying to come up with. It seemed like the worn out surface that Kansas has kind of provided multi grooves where you were able to see the cars go top to bottom and truly, really race hard one another all race long. So I really enjoyed it from start to finish. Speaking out to Chase Elliott Nation, I was watching the race at one of his sponsors at the local Hooters, and just noticing people that weren't there to watch the race were tuning in to watch those really close battles, and that was kind of awesome to see. Kansas was definitely not a track I had circled this year. With this package, it was definitely something that I figured, there's 2 dates. It's probably going to be a good race. It's probably going to have a good turnout, but I definitely didn't think it was going to be as exciting as it was. I was pleasantly surprised. I also really, really enjoyed, and I know we'll talk about it later, the mix of drivers that were involved all race long. There were different guys in the mix. Kevin Harvick dominated early, as we'll probably talk to a little later. But just looking at the top 10 and the top 5 at certain times, I was really impressed with who I saw that was racing up there. It was really cool to see. I really enjoyed Kansas.
And so, how do you think this translates to the other mile and a halfers that we've got coming up? Anthony, you mentioned Chicagoland. What do we think this will do at some of the other tracks? It seems like we hit a great, position as far as, the way the package is reacting on the track. I hope the fan base is getting excited about it. Really, if you think about it, Talladega was a spectacular race. Dover, the racing was very good. And then Kansas. I think we're heading in the right direction. What other tracks do you think this package is going to look attractive at as we move into the next third of the season?
Other than Chicagoland, I could really see it shine at Michigan. I think you can throw away the type of racing you saw at Auto Club. Again, that was so early in the season. There were so many unknowns with the package. The cars were built before the season even started, and they were shipped out before the 500 was even over. There was no tweaks they could have made to those cars. They know all they need to know about this package and these cars right now to really take advantage of this package. And really, I think that's what's making the racing good, is these teams finally have these cars figured out. And we're seeing hints of that greatly with Chevrolet and what they're doing. But as far as tracks that I'm looking forward to, I think that Michigan will be really fun because you got those long sweeping turns with a huge momentum that you can get off that high line. I wouldn't be surprised if you see a little bit more play out what you saw in Kansas, where if a guy's running strong on the high line, in order to keep your lead, you got to run that high line and take the air off of them. And I like seeing that kind of a chess game. I didn't think I was going to enjoy that. I thought I was going to want to see the cars get within a few feet of each other on the bumper and get a little bit aero loose, kind of like what we're used to in the 90s and earlier. But this is a new kind of racing where we saw little bits and pieces of side drafting in the turns and trying to slow the cars down instead of get them aero loose, just try to choke them up a little bit. I think Michigan's going to be a nice race. I think Chicagoland is going to be a very exciting race. It was a pretty good race last year. By Chicagoland standards, I think it's going to be a really good race this year if they can get some really good weather. Pocono is one that I'm really looking forward to because of how long those straights are. You're going to have such a huge hole punched in the air. You're going to see cars go, I think, 6 and 7 wide down that straightaway on some of these restarts. We saw, I think, a huge trait of this package show itself at Kansas off of restarts, where the DW and Mike Joy and Jeff brought up that those lead cars off of a restart. The only thing they're doing is they're punching a hole for the guys in the back, and they're at a huge disadvantage, it looks like, just because they're the ones shoveling the air out of the way. So I think a track like Michigan, you're going to see that. But a place like Pocono, you're going to see a lot of slingshot passes, I think, going into that first turn and going into down the Long Pond Straight.
And what's interesting about that track, and we know that track about as good as we know any track, that is typically a very, very difficult turn to make because of the speeds that you carry, the fact that you've got to have great braking at the end of that, that front stretch that just seems to go forever. It should be interesting to watch those cars bunched up and get into that very admittedly tight first turn to get down toward the Long Pond straightaway. That should be a lot of fun to watch and actually watch it in person. So we're looking forward to that. Peter, you are obviously, like the two of us, a huge Chevrolet fan, a follower of Hendrick Motorsports. You've got to be impressed with what we saw on Saturday night from both the Hendrick drivers and Chevrolet. Now, I'm going to be the very first to admit it, and I'm going to admit when I'm wrong. During one of our earlier episodes, we talked about the state of Hendrick Motorsports and what was needed early in the season and throughout this 2019 season for the drivers at Hendrick Motorsports. And we certainly pinged in on Alex Bowman. Well, I will tell you, after the performance Saturday night, I think that young man is well on his way to proving his worth to the Hendrick Motorsports team. Your thoughts on Chevrolet and Hendrick Motorsports and their performance on Saturday night?
Well, I definitely have to like what I'm seeing right now, especially as someone who's a fan of Hendrick Motorsports and Chevrolet combined. I was worried, like we talked about at Dover, the success at Talladega and Chase Elliott's win. We typically say from season to season that that those type of races, super speedways, are outliers. Because anybody could win them. So I was cautiously optimistic about heading into Dover. Dover impressed me. They were able to run up front, run competitive all day long. We saw well within the top 10 that there were some great drivers. Also with the point where Chase was dominating early on in the race. So we're still feeling pretty good. Again, still had that cautious optimism saying that Kansas was going to be the true test, a 1.5-mile track, a track that they returned to in the playoffs. And I was a bit skeptical. I was afraid that all of a sudden these good feelings or this momentum was going to kind of fizzle out. And I am very, very, very impressed with the performance that they brought to Kansas Speedway, not only in the finishing order with the late stage cautions kind of catching out, but all race long there was at least a few Chevys. And I think Anthony pointed out at one time, with the exception of Eric Jones and Kevin Harvick, the entire top 10 was Chevrolet cars, which is awesome to see. To see that they were able to finally, work out the kinks and hopefully find something really shows that, this could be a 3-manufacturer battle all the way through Homestead now. If they can just kind of keep that gas pedal down and keep Ford and Toyota at bay, I think it's going to be a really interesting season. As far as Hendrick specifically goes, so impressed with the 9 car and the 9 team. I think they are the class at Hendrick. But 3 second-place finishes in a row, I don't even know if that's been done before, at least by a driver that hasn't won a race. And like you said before, Rick, I mean, I am ecstatic or over the moon with how Alex Bowman's running right now. He is bringing great cars to the track week in and week out, as we've seen. He's racing with confidence. Hasn't got that win yet. We'll probably talk a little bit more about that finish in a little while, but you got to feel good about him. He's going to get one soon if this continues. I have no doubt about that. William Byron is still, I think, working through some of the things. And Jimmy is going to be another conversation for maybe a little bit later, but ultimately, you got to love what I'm seeing out of the 88 camp and the 9 camp right now.
It's funny you mentioned Jimmy Johnson and a sixth place finish for, it's hard to believe I'm saying this, old JJ, and he's kind of one of the elder statesmen around these days. And really, it looked to me like Saturday night, that was the JJ of old. He made really good runs. He didn't make mistakes. It looked like the crew did very well. Maybe the 48 has something left. We've all been waiting for that. We've had this conversation in my house every week, watching the race that, maybe it's time for Jimmy to go. And boy, after the performance Saturday night, I don't think so. I think he's got something left, and he's got something left to show these young drivers.
I would agree with that completely. I think what you have to look at that's most crucial with Jimmy is he did have 2 wins in 2017 to start off the season, and that was right around the time when Toyota and Ford were kind of struggling with their cars. And once they started gaining traction, the whole Chevy camp said that they felt like they were getting left behind. And then last year with the new Camaro, the Chevy was just at a huge disadvantage. So I think that there's a lot more weight to put into Jimmy's struggles in the last season and a half, with just it being kind of Chevy related, because we can see little sparks of it, especially at Texas. We saw him lead a bunch of laps, and now with Chevy finding a little bit more speed, you're seeing those sparks of old Jimmy start to come back. And I think as the season wears on, and if Chevy can continue to improve, I think you're going to see Jimmy improve. And I agree with you, Rick. I've had those thoughts in my head. Maybe at the end of 2019 or 2020, it's going to be Jimmy's last hurrah. But his performances lately, even though they haven't been completely solid as far as Jimmy standards, they've at least put off those thoughts to maybe even further and beyond 2020.
Peter, some additional thoughts on the 48 car?
Yes, actually, post race on early Sunday, I was looking into the 48 to see if anybody really interviewed him, because that was one of my complaints that I had seen post race, and especially after I had left. After I left watching the race at the restaurant, even on Sirius XM, he wasn't spoken to, which was a little bit concerning, because considered he did finish 6th, and he is 7-time champion. In his interview with Jeff Gluck, he brought up a really interesting point, and the headlines definitely kind of enticed maybe some different ideas. But Jimmy has kind of confirmed now that he's the one bringing what we would quote unquote call the test car at Hendrick Motorsports. He said that he's bringing the aggressive setup, and he's starting to get a little frustrated in the current performance that he's had each week. And seeing that he was able to finally, get one of those solid finishes. It was really awesome to see and refreshing. But I think Jimmy, who's always somebody who's very mild-mannered and very political or presidential, he seemed very frustrated in his words and comments there. And I can't say I blame Hendrick Motorsports. Looking at the lineup that they have, I feel like you have to go with Jimmy Johnson for the experience to set those cars up the right way. I think it's quite an awful lot to burden Chase Elliott with, and definitely with Alex Bowman, who's had limited experience outside of the simulator, and William Byron, who's pretty much green behind the ears with the Cup car. You had to go to Jimmy, so it was quite interesting to kind of catch that. I think that is kind of more of a telltale than like a drop in his performance. I think if they're really bringing aggressive setups plus the combination of a new crew chief, I think that is much more of an indicator of what Jimmy's been the last season or two, as to whether or not he's still got it, or he's washed up. I'm interested to see, as they're picking up speed, if they'll kind of tone those setups down now that they've finally found something, and we'll see if Jimmy can mix it right up there with Chase and Bowman.
A great performance by Chevrolet, and so do you think that we will see? And of course, the All-Star races, that tends to be kind of an anomaly. It's really designed for the fans. It's, as we've talked about before, it's kind of a test pattern, if you will, for NASCAR. How do you think the momentum that Chevrolet, and in particular Hendrick Motorsports, has seen over the past couple of weeks translates into the Coke 600? Charlotte has always been a very favorite destination of Jimmy Johnson. How do you think Chevrolet performs in the Coke 600 looking ahead?
I think you got to look back to this race um, and see how they handle the transition into night. The Chevys really didn't wake up until that sun started to set at Kansas, and the 600 is notorious for being 2/3 of a night race.
Right.
If they could set up for the night, look. You got Chad Knaus in the Chevy camp. You got Alan Gustafson. You've got some of the best crew chiefs in that Chevy camp. Chad Johnson with the 42. They're smart. They know they can sacrifice for the beginning part of the race to have the car set up for the night. The All-Star race, I think, is going to be really exciting this year now, because you're not just going to have the Fords and the Toyotas battling. I think the Chevys are going to be right up there. I expect guys like Larson, who love the high line, who love burning up those tires and know that they have, I think the longest stint is 20, 25 laps to do so. You don't have a limit on your tires. You could change your tires after every stint. Guys like Larson, guys like Elliott, even Bowman, who's kind of become a Larson 2.0 as of late, loving that high line and using it to perfection. I think you're going to see them really take advantage of this package, and especially from what they learned the last few weeks and even last year. The only real wild card that's going to happen now is that you're going to have these different air ducts that are coming up from the radiator through the hood. But other than that, I think you're going to see a bunch of Chevy resurgence in the All-Star. I think they're actually going to put on a battle this time. I wouldn't be surprised if Chevy won one or two of the open stages, if not the whole All-Star race at the end of the night. And I really, really would not be surprised anymore if a Chevy just flat out woke up and just led 200 laps and wound up winning the race. And if that's what's going to happen, I'd have to think it's coming out of the Hendrick camp.
Peter, your thoughts on that as far as how this whole resurgence of Chevrolet and Hendrick translates to the Charlotte Motor Speedway?
It's definitely going to be awesome. Again, if this is the new Chevy and we're seeing this uptick in performance last now, it's going to be really interesting to see how they do with the All-Star race, even with the changes of the package, as well as the 600. I'm more excited for the 600 because I feel like that's going to be more of the consistent 2019, for obvious reasons. They're not really trying anything aggressive or new like they are at the All-Star. My one to watch for that, even though it's way too early to predict anything right now, would be Chase, because at Kansas, he seemed to have the car set up wicked loose early on when the sun was out, and he was able to keep up with Harvick. He actually was running faster lap times than him at one point on older tires. And then as that sun went in and everybody else seemed to come to life, Chase was the one that was consistently always there. Was gutted he couldn't get the W at the end, but it was pretty awesome to see. With the 600, you spend a lot more time under that sun. If Charlotte races similar to Kansas, I think you can see a lot of those drivers that we saw on Saturday night in the mix for the 600. As far as the All-Star race goes, I think it's going to favor the wicked, and by that I mean the aggressive. I think you're going to see drivers like Kyle Busch, Kyle Larson, and Chase Elliott, who was really aggressive Saturday night at certain points. I know we were texting each other, kind of going bananas in our little chat of some of the moves we were seeing. Definitely Anthony and myself at times, for sure. But I think that the added aero changes for the All-Star race are going to bring a lot tighter racing for Charlotte Motor Speedway. I think that's going to favor the aggressive. Who is going to throw the block? Who's going to get up, like Anthony said, and really side draft if that becomes a factor at Charlotte, and try to make those moves to force it. Going out on a really bold limb here, and I'm going to tell you, based off of the current popularity votes right now that has DiBenedetto in the lead for the fan vote, I'm going to say that if it stays the same, Alex Bowman is going to get his first win at the All-Star Open. I know it's not an official race win, but he's going to race his way in there. Just based on what I'm seeing, based on how aggressive he's been, I think you're going to see the same Chevys that have picked up in the last few weeks continue to pick up for Charlotte race weekends. I'd like to see somebody else get in the mix. It was really cool to see Chris Buescher and Tyler Reddick in the top 10 at Kansas. Credit where credit's due. But I really want to see William Byron step up, and nothing would be better to see the 24 car arrive just like it did in 1994 when Jeff Gordon did.
Before we switch topics, I wanted to raise one thing that was probably the highlight of my evening on Saturday, in addition to the racing. And, NASCAR, as we talk all the time, is a big family, and sometimes we argue among family members, but we are always there to support each other, and there isn't anything that could be a little bit more concerning than a child becoming injured or a child getting hurt some way, somehow. And it was very heartening to see young Brexton Bush looking like his old self and looking no worse for the wear on Saturday night as he was getting hoisted around on Dad's shoulders. So, we want to have a little bit of a shout out to that young man, and are very happy to see he is doing well and is no worse for the wear for his accident on his four-wheeler. I know that as a parent, and kind of growing up in a farm community, our son has always had a four-wheeler. It was always a concern when he was a young boy. It still is today. When he goes out there tooling around on his four-wheelers here on our property, it was good to see that Brexton is doing well and that mom and dad are as always there to support him. So, a big shout out to him, and thank God he's doing okay.
Absolutely.
The last topic this evening we're going to talk about is one that's can be a difficult one to tackle. We've seen in other sports, and we haven't seen it all that much in NASCAR. NASCAR drivers live on the edge each and every week that they're out there on the track, and they tend to be very stoic. Even when you see them come out of the infield care center, they're extremely stoic no matter what they're feeling inside. And late last week, a story broke regarding Bubba Wallace that, anyone who has ever witnessed people going through issues with depression or, emotional challenges in their life, it doesn't matter whether you're a Bubba fan, it doesn't matter whether you're an RPM fan, you can't help but feel for the human being who is going through this sort of anguish. I had an opportunity a couple of years ago to meet Bubba. He is an outstanding young man. He's a good driver. I'm going to talk a little bit about, what he is going through and what our take is on both him and kind of the generic state of RPM. We don't want to become too speculative, but, I guess suffice to say that RPM, and I think this is certainly a fair statement, RPM is not going to be confused anytime soon with Hendrick Motorsports or JGR or Stuart Haas. It is not one of the top echelon teams. They have had their challenges, but I can't help but feel for Bubba. As I said, he's an outstanding young guy, and we want to be sensitive to this topic, but we obviously want to tackle it. Part of the reason we have this show is to discuss some of the issues that don't necessarily get the proper airplay that we hear in other forums, whether it's in this media or in traditional media. Bubba is someone who has come along at a point in time when NASCAR is trying to reach out to a variety of demographics. We have somewhat touched on that issue before. We could devote an entire show, and probably will, to the state of NASCAR's drive for diversity. And I'm going to make a comparison here, and then I'm going to turn the conversation over to the two of you. When Wendell Scott came along, Wendell Scott came into NASCAR at a point in time when NASCAR was really in its infancy. It didn't have wide appeal. was a fairly limited fan base, and certainly media coverage in the days he was driving in NASCAR was limited. Bill Lester came along at a point in time when NASCAR was starting to find itself. It was starting to get recognition on a national stage, but certainly nowhere near what it is today. And then along comes Bubba Wallace, and Bubba, certainly has the talent. He's got the motivation. In many ways, the sport and society and the fan base and the equipment he's had over the years in his, still very young career, has really done him a disservice, I think. In many ways, for different reasons. I have likened the challenges for Bubba Wallace, which is just enormous. And, you wouldn't be surprised that he's going through the issues and the challenges he's currently having. Bubba is as close to this generation as we've seen since 2 generations ago. Watch Jackie Robinson come into Major League Baseball for different reasons. I'm not comparing him to Jackie Robinson. There really isn't anybody you could compare to Jackie. But for different reasons, Bubba Wallace means an awful lot to NASCAR. Bubba Wallace's success brings a whole new perspective to the sport. And in some ways, and I'm going to let Anthony speak to this in greater detail, in some ways, Bubba is just kind of the right guy at the wrong time. He comes into the sport on the heels of all of us watching the tremendous anticipation of when Danica Patrick came over from IndyCar, and the fact that we were now appealing to 51% of the general population of the United States. And while I don't want to spend this time talking any kind of negativity toward Danica, the statistics speak for themselves. Danica's career in NASCAR was less than any of us had anticipated, including herself. It really was not a successful venture. And so I think people are looking at Bubba in ways that are, very unfair to him, an awful lot of pressure put on him. And I will tell you, and again, I think this is a fair statement on my part. If you were to put Bubba Wallace, and we've seen this with Eric Almirola. Eric Almirola is in the same vehicle Danica Patrick was in. And the results are consistently better. If you were to take Bubba Wallace, and I'm just going to say this, and put him in, let's say, the 24 car, with all of the support of Hendrick Motorsports and Chevrolet, would we be seeing a different Bubba Wallace at this point? I personally think we would. And so with that, I'm going to kind of turn this over to Anthony and then Peter for your thoughts. He's a great young guy, and I'd hate to see anybody go through this. I don't care whether you're a NASCAR driver or not. I just think that the sport and society has put a tremendous amount of pressure on this young man, and we're all guilty of it. Every media outlet, whether it is in this forum, this kind of forum, or traditional media, whether it's print or it's radio or it's television, people have anticipated things from this young man that really have been unfair to him, given all of the circumstances, including, not the least of which is the equipment he has. So, Anthony, your thoughts on Bubba Wallace?
Yeah, Rick, that was all beautifully said and summarized. It's going to be hard to follow that, but yeah, no. Like you said, the news broke that Bubba, through admission of his own in a way, through some pretty ominous tweets on Thursday, has been struggling with some demons, struggling with a battle with depression. Anybody who's known anybody that's battled depression or has gone through it themselves knows that it's more than just a fleeting moment or a fleeting emotion or a feeling. It's something that you do have to live with or deal with and tackle every day. Every day is a new challenge. Um, for a gentleman like Bubba, who in front of the camera looks like the cheeriest, most bubbly personality probably that NASCAR has right now, as far as just pure, I guess, generational label of enthusiasm and energy at this point. To hear that he's going through these struggles is pretty awakening for everybody. Just to know that, you don't have to look it on the outside to be going through something like that, and for him to have finally worn his heart on his sleeve, I think should tell people that it's gotten to a point where this might have been his cry for help. But like you said with Bubba, I don't remember, Rick, if it was you that said it or if it was somewhere on NASCAR media that they said it. But he's been unfortunately perfectly labeled as the driver that came at the right time in the wrong scenario. Or the right place at the wrong time. That's how I've seen it phrased, and it just can't be more accurate with his almost his entire career. We saw it in his Xfinity Series and Nationwide Series career with Roush, just as he started to produce consistent, improved results. His team ran out of money. I believe it was 2 seasons ago. They had to end their season short because of lack of sponsorship, which eventually became the ultimate precursor to the whole Roush Fenway Xfinity team shutting down at the end of last season, I believe. Bubba was just unfortunately the first to bite the dust as far as not having the funding. He did fill in for Eric in the 2017 season. His first race was Pocono, the first Pocono race of that year, and he had a decent result for a guy who has never been in a Cup car before. But yeah, I think he's unfairly been given a huge weight, and I think it might be because of a failed predecessor. And you alluded to it a little bit also with Danica, and how Danica was seen as the new superstar that was going to bring the new demographic of females and girls to the sport. She was going to blaze the trail. She was going to light the track on fire. And again, it's not an insult to her ability or anything, but the results just were not there over the course of the 6 seasons or 5 seasons. I think it was 6 seasons that she was in the sport. And then you get Bubba just starting to gain popularity throughout that time frame. It more became of, all right, Danica set the stage. Now, Bubba, it's time for you to take over. And again, it's the move to his Cup team going RPM. I think it's just another consequence of right place at the wrong time. He's a driver that had a lot of popularity, a lot of fan support. There's been tons of fan support behind him, especially when he was in the Xfinity races. And there was the news that he was going to struggle to find a ride and struggle to find even a Truck Series ride, that people just wanted him in a car because of the person he was, let alone the ability that this gentleman has. So when the 43 seat became vacant, Bubba was, as many saw, the obvious choice to fill that seat, just because he's earned that shot. He went through a lot. He's not somebody who's necessarily had everything spoon fed to him his whole career. He's gone out there and he's earned every seat that he's had. And he's also bit the bullet on a lot of those pains and sufferings. We're seeing the same trend with Bubba right now, I think, that we saw with Eric. when he was in the 43, and now it's been confirmed because seeing him go to the 10 car, show the results. Let alone, I think you could just forget who he replaced. Just look at Almirola as his own entity, and going from the 43 to the 10, the two differences in equipment, he can now showcase his talent. Bubba's in a place where everybody's expecting him to showcase his talent, like a William Byron, like an Alex Bowman, like an Eric Almirola, like a Daniel Suarez, who's now in the 41 car. But I don't think he has the equipment to allow him to do that. If you look, with the exception of this Talladega race, because it was a very short race for him, his best races are the races that don't require the best chassis or the best engine, and those are typically the restrictor plate races. I think it's more of a testament to RPM's struggles as an organization and the unfortunate, really bad timing of somebody who has an explosive personality and an explosive talent potential getting into a seat that is just not going to get him anywhere. And even before we started this broadcast, we always had the talk about Almirola when he was in the 43. It was more of a, do you really think the 43 car is that bad, or is it just Eric doesn't have what it takes? Now we see the difference with him, and it makes you wonder, with Bubba's struggles, does he need the shot at a better ride? Like you were alluding to earlier, if you were to put him in the 24 or the 48 or the 42 or the 1, or even I think at this point, the 37 or the 32, you're going to see a market improvement in his results. You're going to see him have more fun out there on the track. He's really kind of regressed off of social media in the last few months, and I think it's got a direct relation to struggling on the track, not having fun on race day. It weighs you down for the rest of the week. And he alluded to that in the interview that he gave on Friday or Saturday, that you don't get the results that you're expected to get, and then you feel a type of personal responsibility for it. And he's also been given the weight of bringing in this demographic, and he's been given every opportunity to embrace it, and he's done nothing but shrug it off. He's labeled himself a racer. Everybody wants to label him something different, and he says, I am here to race. I don't care about any of the other phrases or labels or anything you're putting on me. He's like, I'm a racer. I get in a race car, I put a helmet on just like everybody else, and I'm here to race. I don't care what happens behind the scenes. That's all you guys. That's all NASCAR fluffing it. He needs to break himself from that, and I think a change of scenery would probably do him a lot of good right now.
Peter, your thoughts? It's a delicate topic, but one that we have to tackle and we have to look at. And your thoughts on Bubba and the situation at RPM?
Well, first off, my heart goes out to Bubba Wallace. Anybody that's struggling with anything right now, whether it be depression or anything in between, it's not something you want to hear from anybody. It's not something you want to wish on your worst enemy. Also, so my heart really goes out to him. And if it's stuff relative to what's going on the track, hopefully he can kind of put that behind him, as we say in our own racing circle. We can't get caught up on what goes on the last lap or what goes on the last race. You got to put it behind you and keep moving forward. It sounds like, and Anthony talked about it before, and you did as well, that it's something beyond what's going on the track with him. It's something that's been eating at him for a long time, and the fact that he's kind of come out and spoke about this now to bring it publicly is very courageous on his part, and I admire him for doing so. And just kind of going through some of the social media pages and whatnot after he made those comments, and as you guys were speaking, there's a great sense of respect amongst the NASCAR fan community, and people kind of rallying around this, even putting themselves out there to say, like, hey, Bubba, I know you're busy, I know you're a celebrity, but if you want to talk, if someone has similar experiences, NASCAR is a family. And, it's really great to see people coming out to support him. Nobody wants to see him fall into a deep and dark place, or even further than he has already fallen. So as far as his mental and emotional health state goes, I hope he can get the help that he needs. I know that NASCAR will be there to help him, and hopefully we can kind of right the ship. As far as the performance goes, I'm with Anthony there, and I'm sure you share the same sentiments as many of our viewers, I'm sure, do as well. I think it's an RPM issue. I don't think Bubba's a bad race car driver. I never thought Bubba was a bad race car driver. I never thought that Bubba was there specifically because of who he was. As Anthony said before, I really think that that Bubba Wallace is one of the drivers that wanted to earn his way, knew he was a little different, but he doubled down on that statement, as Anthony said, that he's a racer. He's there to race. He doesn't want any special treatment. He wants to go out there and perform the very best. And I think that's why a lot of people really kind of took to him recently. I'm definitely a fan. It's heartbreaking to see the performance week in and week out from his race car, but I know it's not Bubba Wallace as the driver. I know it has a lot to do with RPM. Last year it was very easy to blame it on the transition to Chevrolet because Chevrolet as a whole was down. So the team that was probably the bottom feeder as far as technology and resources go, they were probably going to be the one that hurt the most. Now that that's kind of beginning to fade away, it doesn't look like RPM's turning the corner like other Chevrolet teams are. It looks like RPM is completely lost. I mean, there's some times where I feel like it looks like they're bringing an Xfinity car to the races. Now, it was interesting on Friday night. He was one of the cars that was up there in qualifying for quite some time. He was close to the top of the board. I believe he was leading it for maybe the first few minutes until you had about maybe 10 cars or so go, and then he was in the top 6 or so positions for a while, and then the Stewart-Haas cars and everybody really kind of came in. But he seemed to look decent, and I had some optimism for him with Kansas. However, it just seems like they cannot put a complete race together. They are well and far behind their satellite team with RCR, and they don't seem to be anywhere close anytime soon. I know Richard's more of a figurehead for that role. He's there as a support. He's there in name and brand only, but something's got to change at RPM if they're going to get that 43 car right. Or I think it's safe to say that we may see a future where the 43 car is not on the track anymore. Again, going back to Bubba and the opportunities that he's had, I really think that he is one of those people that has kind of suffered at being in the right place at the wrong time, essentially, because he's gotten his opportunities. He's really fought his way. However, sponsorship has never been consistent for him, which I don't know about you guys, but how could sponsorship be a problem for somebody like him? Removing performance, even before so, he is a likable guy. He has decent looks for a young driver, and he has got personality. He has personality that can revolutionize this sport and take it to the next level, in my opinion. How could he struggle with sponsorship? And that could be a multitude of things. It could be the organization, the team, contracts, prior clauses, all those different things. But it's kind of sad and upsetting to see that he's been at the receiving end of the bad news or the bad luck for so long. I don't know how many other opportunities he may possibly get. I think the longer he stays in the Cup Series racing at RPM, the worse off his chances will be. But then again, what really quality rides are up for grabs at this point right now? The first one that pops in my mind, but they have a decent pipeline of drivers, would probably be the one car if Kurt Busch decided to leave. And then again, that's not anything that's a definite. Would the 48 be an ideal spot? I think Hendrick's got to be, as I said before, they got to be very wary. If you have 4 young drivers that are unproven, can you really set up those cars efficiently? You have an awful lot to require from your crew chiefs at that point. And I think you need that veteran experience to set up cars. I mean, in the perfect world, I'd love to see Kyle Busch shake down the 43 car and tell us what it really has. Never going to see it, but I really don't know what other opportunities would be out there for him to improve on. I just think, and I know that the 43 car, if they do not somehow figure out a way to right that ship, it's not going to be good for Bubba in the long run. I just hope he lands on his feet wherever he goes, because if he's in this emotional state, I think losing his ride, possibly either getting sent down or not having a ride, like we've seen happen to Trevor Bayne recently and many other drivers, I think that would really, really, really not sit well with him. I think it's going to devastate the poor guy. And hopefully he can come back from something like that. I hope it never happens. I think, like I said before, he's a great personality. He has the talent. He's been able to get it done in the trucks. To win an Eldora dirt race is something that is very difficult to do. Also, to win a short track race like Martinsville is very difficult to do. And he was able to get both of those done. I think he has an immense talent. He was also able to run, I think he was running consecutively sixth, I think 3 weeks or 4 weeks in a row when he was in that Roush Xfinity car. He was really starting to get it. So I'm hoping he can land on his feet. He can get the opportunity that he deserves. He can kind of get everything going on the NASCAR side. But more importantly than that, and that's what I'm going to end off is I hope he gets the support and the help. And we know he has a great bromance and a best friend in Ryan Blaney. Ryan Blaney seems like the kind of guy that would support him. But I definitely know, after, like I said before, seeing the NASCAR community reach out, I definitely think that people are going to be there, to help him and support him all throughout. That's the most important thing. The performance, the performances and the racing will always be there. But I want to make sure, and I hope that Bubba is going to be okay in the long run.
Anthony's last thoughts on Bubba Wallace and the whole RPM issue.
I mirror Peter's sentiment. Above all, we know that racing isn't life as much as we think that it is. We all have the thought that motor oil is what pumps through our veins, and that's what gets us going in every day. But really, it's family, love, and God that really is what it's all about. And I think that Bubba needs to surround himself with probably the people that he's already surrounding himself with. He's got a great girlfriend. He's got a great friendship with Bubba and Chase and a few other of the younger drivers in Xfinity. Take care of yourself first. Like Peter said, racing will always be there. I think Bubba is the type of personality that will always get an opportunity. It may not necessarily be in Cup, but we've seen drivers like Justin Allgaier, Elliott Sadler make careers out of running in the Xfinity and enjoy great success with that as well. So I do hope that he does get the help and the support and love that he needs, and I'm sure that he is, and I'm sure he knows that he's not alone in that battle. And I think bringing it out to the public and seeing the reception that he has on social media and the responses he's been getting. Jeff Gordon himself said it on the broadcast as they aired that story, and Jeff himself said that he has a much bigger deal of respect for somebody like Bubba and for Bubba himself, just because it's not a topic you hear about in sports in general, and especially in NASCAR, where you could crack your skull one weekend and get in the car the next and not complain about it. This isn't a sport where you usually hear storylines like this. So for him to get kudos from Jeff, I'm sure also gave Bubba a huge smile as well. For the RPM, I have a really kind of cutthroat theory as to what needs to happen. I think Richard needs to sell the team with the promise of keeping the 43 in the sport. But how awesome would the headline be for RCR to completely take over RPM and just bring the full resurgence of the 3, the 43, and the 8 car? Have those 3 iconic numbers under one roof, under one title, and bring those numbers back to life. To the success that they've seen. Like that, to me, I think that's what the 43 car it needs. And I'm saying 43 meaning just the number. I think the number needs to stay in NASCAR. There's no reason for it to not exist in NASCAR in any capacity. But we've heard from Smithfield when they were going through the turmoil with Eric that Richard may not be the easiest to deal with when it comes to sponsorship. He believes in handshake agreements, I think, way too much as opposed to contracts and results. So I think Richard needs to either give much more control over to Childress so that he can keep his name in the team, or he just needs to finally kind of accept it. And I'm sure he was building RPM for Kyle and his other kids to take over, but it just doesn't seem like that's in the cards anymore. It's time to give it to somebody that is going to take care of the brand. And I think a full transition over to Richard Childress Racing is what's best for the 43. Whether or not Bubba's in the seat long enough to see that kind of a transition, I don't know, but that would be a really awesome storyline for NASCAR to have going into a Speed Weeks, where you got Richard Childress with the 3, the 8, and the 43 all under one banner.
And who better to protect a brand, an iconic brand, than RC? I mean, who better?
Yeah.
Who better to do that? That is a great point, and really, there's a whole show all by itself talking about.
And just to point out quickly, like what Peter was saying with sponsorship and how hard it was for Bubba, Roush is somebody who's very controlling of the sponsorship that's put on cars, and it seemed like Roush only really wanted Ford on the hood of that car for the last season and a half it was there, and then when the money ran dry, he went a different route and put the money on the 60 car. And kind of left Bubba out to dry. And I think you're seeing that with the 43, where Richard is only wanting to put certain brands on the car. I'm sure there are way more sponsors chomping at the bits to sponsor a man like Bubba in a 43 car. But I think that you're getting the really selective nature of somebody like the King saying no to a lot more sponsors than any of us even know.
That could very well be. And we do have on the drafting table an entire broadcast that does nothing other than talk about advertising in NASCAR and sponsorships in NASCAR and things that, we have seen trends in and things we'd like to see happen at the Cup level as far as series sponsorships, different types of team sponsorships, etc. So I'm sure that discussion of what happens with the 43 car will be all part of that general discussion on sponsorships and advertising in the sport we all love. Well, I'm looking at the clock on the wall and I'm seeing, wow, we've covered an awful lot in an hour's time. We obviously welcome your comments about all of our shows. Tonight's show had 3 interesting topics that hopefully got all of you thinking and talking amongst yourselves as to what your thoughts are on Kansas and the resurgence of Chevrolet and Hendrick Motorsports, and obviously the news late last week on Bubba Wallace. Anthony, tell our viewers how they can get themselves better acquainted with 3 Wide, so that we can hopefully continue to grow this audience and bring the word of NASCAR across the United States and wherever you may be watching and listening to 3 Wide.
Absolutely. Once again, if you guys are watching our broadcast or if you come across our broadcast either through recommended views or by clicking any of the links that we post on social media, hit that subscribe button. It lets us know that you guys like our content. And if you really like our content and want to see more of it, and as soon as we go live and be able to take part in our live chat streams that we have during the broadcast, hit that bell icon. What that does is it gives you an instant notification when we decide to go live or schedule a live event. And you'll also see exactly when we go live, and you'll be hit with a link straight into your email box and right onto your YouTube page, bringing you right on into the chat and the discussion. Other than that, just if you come across our videos, leave a comment, give us some critiques. We do still have those rookie stripes on the rear bumper of our cars. So we're still new at this. We still want to improve, and we know that we're going to have many more broadcasts to show you guys what we're made of.
Peter, final thoughts heading into All-Star Weekend?
Oh boy. All right. All-Star weekend, we better tighten those belts because we're going to see something that we haven't seen yet. All right. It's going to be interesting. Got a new package, a new arrow that's going to be on these race cars. You got an open with a lot of hungry drivers. We got 3 manufacturers leading into this week that look pretty much nice and even at this point in the season. It's going to be white knuckle racing. It's all for $1 million, and I hope to see some upset feelings. I hope to see some blood boil, and I want to see a tight finish for that $1 million.
And above all, we are hoping for great weather for 2 weeks solid in Charlotte, North Carolina. Well, Anthony and Peter, I'm looking up from the top of the war wagon here up at the spotter stand, and I am reminded, as always, that until our spotter tells us it's all clear.
You're 3 wide.
So for Anthony, for Peter, for all of us here at 3 Wide, I'm Rick. Have a great Monday evening, and we will see you after the All-Star race. Good night, everybody.
Take care, everyone.